You're listening to Paris' State of Mind on Paris Underground Radio. For more great content, join us on Patreon at patreon.com/Paris Underground Radio.
Welcome to Paris, a State of Mind. Join us as we talk about the good, the bad, the ins, the outs of property rentals and purchases in and around Paris. We'll have topics for renters, owners, and visitors, share questions we are regularly asked, and more. My name is Gail Boisclair of Perfectly Paris, and my co-host is Marie Pistinier of Lokim Paris. Be a part of it. Both of us are proud members of the SPLM, the first representative body of furnished rental professionals. Hello, everyone. We are back in the studio with Paris Underground Radio, and we're continuing on with our series about living in different areas of Paris. As you may recall, Marie and I did our quick and very biased overview of each of the different areas, but now instead, to be a little less biased, we've decided to invite people on and talk about areas that they like or that they live in or that they used to live in. Today, as a guest, we have one of our wonderful fellow podcast hosts. It's Kate Kemp-Griffin, and she has a podcast called Paris Undressed. She's also got a book that she wrote with the same name, Paris Undressed, that came out in, I think, 2016. Isn't that right?
Yes, that's right.
Welcome, Kate.
Hi, Gail. Thank you so much.
And there's so much more to know about Kate, but I'll let her give you some more information at the end of our podcast as well, too. So let me ask you, I know you don't currently live right in Paris. Well, sometimes you do right now, but that's a story that I know for personal reasons. What district are we talking about with you today?
Well, first of all, Gail, thank you so much to invite me to this podcast. I am an avid listener and have learned, despite many years of living in France, an awful lot about real estate in Paris' state of mind. So tips are for everybody, whether you come in early or late to Paris. So thank you for sharing so generously all of that information, and I have definitely benefited. Today, we are going to be talking about the 11th arrondissement, where we actually have an apartment. And you're correct. We have lived in different places and actually full-time live in the country outside of Paris, but adore the 11th arrondissement.
Well, good. Now, did you ever actually live in the apartment that you own in the 11th?
It's a studio. So, and I have a large family. We're a group of 7 in our family with 5 kids. So, no, in a studio that wouldn't have worked out. But the idea at the beginning was, as the kids got older and expenses and everybody needed to live somewhere probably at some point, and as an entrepreneur in France looking dismally at what would be called a retirement savings plan, we just sort of thought investing or not exactly. We saw the big fat egg ahead of us and thought that probably investing in pierre, as they say, in real estate would be a good idea. And in particular, when I thought of possibly having to help 5 children rent somewhere, I thought if we could take 1 or 2 off the list, that might be a good idea. So the premise to begin with was really, where would we buy something that we could use that would be a good investment? And much like how we've run a lot of our lives here, what would we like to do with something as well as have it be a good investment? And pick the 11th by choice, you know. And I always thought of myself as a left bank person, which turned out not to be.
Paris can surprise us like that. And so why did you decide on the 11th?
The 11th is always really about an energy and a way of arriving in the arrondissement for me. So if I am coming by metro, where am I exiting from? Where am I leaving from? And do I like coming back to the metro where my home is? Do I walk up feeling an energy, or do I walk up and smell something I don't want to smell, or see something I don't want to see? And always have to, and we've had that in a few other apartments too. And it, you know, this is a very luxurious way of picking a arrondissement. And a lot of times you don't have a lot of choices, but even when I haven't had a choice and it hasn't been great, I've orchestrated my exits and entries from my house to actually or my home to feel as if I'm walking in and out of the best way possible to it. So the energy, it's at Metro Bastille or Voltaire, the apartment.
Okay.
And it's just off of Rue de la Roquette, which is a very animated street in the 11th. And it was the energy. There was an energy and there was a youth. And there are a lot of places that are open extremely late. And I just thought for anybody coming home late at 2, 4, 6 o'clock in the morning, it was nice to feel that there was an energy on the streets. And I like the choice, the diversity of cafes and stores and shopping that just gave a different pulse. Yeah, you can feel the pulse of the 11th.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to describe it.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, as you say, it is an area that has a lot of action happening. So it's true that you'd never, for example, worry about coming home at, like you said, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. And by the way, what are you doing out until 6 o'clock in the morning?
Well, hey, it's Paris. Yeah.
Hey, well, your book was called Paris Undressed.
Paris Undressed, yes. Well, I mean, I was thinking about the kids, that they didn't have to walk. There are fabulous areas. Every part of Paris is fabulous, but there's just some parts that just feel, a tad more isolated. There's a lot of different incredible areas and apartments and spaces. But if it's a place where you want to be able to get to and out of easily, and to, a studio means that you're actually living by yourself, or, perhaps you're sharing a studio. But the important part was to not feel alone, even if you are alone. And that's sort of what I mean about the energy. And because Paris is a city where we all live much outside of our apartments, the size of the apartment almost doesn't matter, because so much of what happens in Paris is on the streets and in the cafes. So, a lot of times when people come over and visit, they think that you have such a small place compared to what we would be used to in North America. And I happen to be a Canadian as well. So we actually think of space quite differently than most people. So that area, again, is very important. I mean, the apartment space for me is critical, but even more important is the vibrations and the pulse that goes around of where it's your community. And if you're alone, feeling lonely and feeling alone aren't the same. And in a crowded place that feels overburdened, that's not great. I don't think it adds to the loneliness.
So, Kate, I can tell that you're very excited about the 11th. Do you still feel that way now today? And if so, how long ago was it that you purchased the apartment in the 11th?
Mm-hmm. And the answer is absolutely. I loved it when we bought it in 2010, and I love it today. The area just continues to be new and rejuvenated, and there's a sense of community as much as there is a sense of newness of what's sort of on the edge of things to come. A lot of restaurants and a lot of food critics always point to the 11th where new exciting food is. I'm certainly not a foodie or a restaurant expert in any way. And in particular, probably what I look for most in a cafe or in a restaurant is just to be able to walk in and feel like there's a place for me. I'm actually not necessarily looking for the finest of dining experiences. I'm taking it all in. Again, the smell, the cutlery, is there glass? Are there people smiling? Are there tables facing outwards, or are you locked into a corner? Are there heavy fabrics, or is it airy? The food is certainly important, but not the
atmosphere.
Absolutely. Yeah. An unbelievable meal in a very sterile, stuffy place. Yeah, I'd rather eat takeout. That's not part of it. Probably a lot of that has to do because I hang out a lot in cafes, and I wrote a lot of my book, Paris Undressed, in the 11th. I wrote a lot in the studio. And because we live so far out of Paris, the studio gave us an opportunity to be able to go into Paris and not have to worry about the hour and a half, 2 hours to get home, which, when you're dependent on the subway system, which is absolutely fantastic in France when it works, when it doesn't work, you can be on an all-night bus home, stopping almost at every little stop. So the idea of being able to stay overnight and write into the evening and be able to have a glass of wine. So my knowledge of the 11th, if should anybody ever need the advice, is at the time, back in 2010, not everybody had plugs. Outlets were hard to come by. And so I was always on the lookout for a cafe or a restaurant where I could sit for long periods of time and then charge my computer and
devices
continue to write. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so I guess that tells a lot, everything that you've described about the type of people that might be best suited for the area. You know, it sounds for me, it's definitely, you don't want to be 95.
No, but there's an incredible, it's an energy of spirit. There is, when I'm out on that street at, 6:00 in the morning as one is, or in the restaurants or just walking home, there's an agelessness that seems to be more linked to a spirit and an energy of a way of living more than actual youth in age, per se. There are lots of wine bars and jazz and, very friendly.
So I guess it's probably like, it could be singles, it could be couples, maybe a little bit less family oriented. What do you think?
Although I do see a lot of, like everywhere, there's sort of different sizes of apartments too. Judging by the people in the cafes and the hours that they're at, then yes, they aren't, home, looking after a family necessarily, although they could be out, just having an evening out. So yes, youth, young adults. Yeah, I guess I haven't actually visited a park nearby, so I don't really know what the family scene is. As a mother, I did my park strolls in the 15th and the 17th before we just moved to the country. And to be honest, and a terrible mother, I sort of, when I was in Paris writing, it was about leaving the family at home and not worrying about anything myself that night, and one meal. What was I going to eat? Not necessarily what did I have to feed five other kids.
Yeah.
So
That's funny. Before you purchased in that area, are there things that you think that people should know? For example, before living, either renting or buying in that area, that maybe might be important to know? I mean, if it's got a vibe with a lot of people and activity, is it noisy? Is it crowded? What do you think?
Well, it is crowded as most sidewalks are in Paris. And I notice it certainly more when I had a stroller to push than anything else. But I guess, it's very personal, an arrondissement, an area. And I guess my advice would simply be, I remember when things weren't done by internet, we had to go scrolling through newspapers and to find different announcements. I went to every single thing that was listed, not even with no preconceived notion about being in one arrondissement or another. And it really was about what was my first instinct when I arrived. And what did I feel? And what did I smell? And how far away was the boulangerie? How far away was a small grocery store or a big grocery store? What was because your daily life in France is every day, obviously. So the things that you're doing and the schlepping, and our first apartment in the 15th was on the 6th floor without an elevator. That's 120 steps to walk up that 6-pack of milk, and then your kid, and then, whatever that comes up with it. So,
or a case of wine.
Or a case of wine. And then you got to take the bottles back down, albeit they're lighter, but it's still, it's a lot of up and down. And I think it's not necessarily something that if you don't necessarily pay attention to it because that's the kind of person you are, you might not notice that it just wears on you. And we had an apartment which it looked great on paper and it felt great in the idea, but it never really felt great in the entryway. And, when you're in and out, and at the time I had 2 of the kids, you're in and out a lot. Well, that entryway ended up being a lot of time to come in and out, and it affected how you just sort of lived. So again, this is all like, if you have choice, just explore. So the 11th was, like I said, an unexpected area. I mean, it was price driven too. We didn't want to, we couldn't afford to, and we didn't necessarily want to be in a place that was leafy and green and quiet. We were looking for a place that was in the heart of an arrondissement. And in the end, when I sleep there now, I notice that there's more noise, but that's, we're used to the country and certainly the light and whatnot. But I just love
the feeling.
I do. I love the filters that come through, and then the way that you end up absorbing that vibe and the things that you end up doing. So I like that as well. And I like seeing the personalities of the different, my favorite cafe on Rue de la Roquette is Café des Anges. and
Mm.
just love it. And I wrote a lot of Paris Undressed because they had the outlets in the banquettes on the top by their lights. And I actually met a fellow Canadian there who does tours April in Paris.
Oh, wow.
I met her at Café des Anges. So it's a place that my husband and I go to. It's a place where I can go and again be anonymous and observing and watching. And that's so much of what Paris is about. I mean, probably, eavesdropping doesn't necessarily come under the one should be doing, but there's lots of eavesdropping that goes down too. And in Café des Anges, the fondant chocolat is to die for.
Oh.
That's my hot tip.
Fortunately, I don't have a big sweet tooth, but I did make brownies last night for my daughter and her girlfriend.
Yeah, love chocolate.
If you're enjoying this episode of Paris, A State of Mind, you may also be interested in our sister podcast, Don't Miss This. Join Jennifer weekly for the scoop on what's happening in Paris. Paris, A State of Mind will be right back after a word from our sponsors. And now back to Paris, A State of Mind. Is there anything else that you want to add about the 11th?
Strangely enough, it's actually extremely central. When I look at a map of Paris, you sort of feel as if it is central, but it could be maybe a little east, or maybe not. And it's extremely central. You can walk obviously to the 4th, you can walk to the 5th, you can walk all the way to the 6th or the 7th. And it's an very, very accessible arrondissement as well. With the way the metro lines are from west to east at Bastille. Voltaire is an incredibly diverse line where it seems to stop at all of these. Oh, I didn't know you could actually stop there in Paris. Great. That's the stop I needed to go to. Lots of little specialty shops and artisans doing what they do, and enough of the bigger box stores like a Monoprix or something else that you can get to. But it isn't just brands. It isn't just sort of, you could be in any arrondissement because the brands are the same. You really get a sense of
your local commerçants, business owners.
Yeah. I remember there was a cat cafe that was really fun to go to. And there were just lots of cats inside and you picked your seat and your cat.
Well, stepping away from the 11th, if somebody told you that you could have pretty well any apartment in any area of Paris that you want to live in, where would that be? What area? What neighborhood? Cost is no object. There's no hoops that you have to run to. It's just, you get to pick. Where would you live if you could live anywhere in Paris?
Probably not far away from the 11th, sort of that area of the Seine. Yeah, the 11th and the studios that they have, or the loft, there's a lofty feel to a lot of places, an industrial look to things, sort of hidden gardens as you walk in. I would probably, I would make sure that it was probably quieter than being right on the hub of the street. Although our studio's not, it's not noisy, but it's, definitely you can hear a conversation of somebody speaking outside. I like the atypicalness of the 11th. I think I picked the 11th.
Good. Well, that's great.
Yeah. When we were thinking at some point of possibly, just moving to Paris and not living in the country anymore, I was looking definitely in the windows of the real estate in the 11th and the belle vitrée and the industrial pipes and there's even Café de l'Industrie. There's several of those around, wonderful places. Yeah, I'd say the 11th. I'm going to go for the 11th.
Good.
All in for the 11th.
Yay. Well, I'm sure that our listeners will really enjoy your rundown of living in the 11th by Metro Bastille. And thank you for that. And I also want you to elaborate now, getting away from the arrondissement, elaborate just a little bit of you and what you do. And if people want to contact you and find out more about Paris Undressed, either the book, the podcast, or any of your other multiple things that you do, please let our guests know.
Sure, thanks. Yes, there's a podcast that's Paris Undressed and the book Paris Undressed. And it's really about the contours of the city of light and really finding how the senses of lingerie can lead you to feeling more comfortable in your body and without changing a a thing. And I use the lens of lingerie to talk about sensations and senses in particular, and whether that's with the designers. There's lots of interviews with different designers about how they make the lingerie that we wear, and in providing almost an access to this garment that we put on every day that comes with a whole boatload of cliches and expectations, and just sort of break it down so that it actually means something, asking really the question, what does lingerie mean to you? And going from there. So I have 2 Instagram accounts, at Kate Kemp-Griffin, and the other one is at Paris Undressed. Easily available behind any of those screen names. It's me. And yeah, we've lived in Paris for 30 some years.
You beat me.
Yeah. Oh, have I? I think we're neck and neck though, aren't we?
No. I'm almost 22 years.
Oh, you're a baby. You're a baby.
I'm a baby.
Yeah. And we've become French citizens. So it's a real love story and a love affair with this country and the culture. And I also absolutely love Canada as well. So after, raising and birthing 5 children in France, they have all decided to go and live in Canada. So we have to figure out how about that bridge to build. But they're just 2 beautiful countries to be able to share. Very, very lucky, of course.
I agree. Being a fellow Canadian, of course. And do you have a website?
Oh, yes, I do have a website. It's katherinkemp-griffin.com. That's KATHRYN. KEMPGRIFFIN.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much, my dear friend Catherine.
Thank you, Gail.
As everybody really calls her.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure.
Merci, ma belle.
Thanks for listening to Paris, A State of Mind, featuring Gail of Perfectly Paris and Marie of Loquim, both who are founding members of the SPLM. Paris, A State of Mind is produced by Paris Underground Radio. The music, Jazz in Paris, is by Media Right Productions. For more information on this show and others, go to parisundergroundradio.com.
This episode of Paris: A State of Mind was produced by Jennifer Garrity for Paris Underground Radio. For more great content, join us on Patreon at patreon.com/Paris Underground Radio.